Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Today we'll be showing you how tower management companies can benefit from Microsoft Dynamics. Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar will take roughly 30 minutes and will be followed by a short question and answer period. On the right hand side of your screen you will see your GoToWebinar control panel where you can raise your hand and ask questions. Feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation and the presenters will be happy to answer all your questions at the end of the demo. Right, I'll start us off today by introducing our speakers Neil and Derek. Then we'll give an overview of who BDO and Binary Stream are, followed by the benefits of Tower Management Solution for Dynamics GP. We'll then get into the demo portion of the presentation and wrap it up with some Q&A. So we'll start off by introducing Neil McDonald. Neil has over 20 years of business, project, and IT management experience. While at Binary Stream, Neil's developed an expertise in delivering ERP solutions for property management companies. We also have Derek Zedich from BDO Canada with us today. Derek has a broad background in ERP experience and specializes in delivering business solutions that promote financial and operational effectiveness. I'll turn the presentation over to Derek now.
Thanks, Jake. As Jake mentioned, my name is Derek Zedich. I'm a manager with BDO. And for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about BDO and Microsoft, a little bit about who we are and what we do. I think most people recognize BDO as a global professional services organization focusing on tax and audit and accounting. I'm actually part of the technology group at BDO called BDO Solutions. BDO Solutions is a national Microsoft business partner. We implement and support all of the Microsoft Dynamics business solutions, that being Dynamics GP, AX, NAV, and CRM. BDO is the largest Dynamics partner in Canada, and we've received many prestigious awards, such as President's Club and Inner Circle, meaning top 1% of all business partners in Canada and around the world. We're also Microsoft Dynamics Partner of the Year for the last 3 years running, and we're very proud of that. Another interesting fact about BDO is that the vast majority of our consulting team are certified professionals, so CAs, CMAs, CGAs, CPAs, etc. So what better people to implement business management systems. So BDO has about 700 customers running Microsoft Dynamics throughout Canada. We've been implementing Microsoft Dynamics for about 15 years. And we have about a little over 100 professional services consultants dedicated to Microsoft Dynamics implementation and support. So I just want to spend a couple minutes and talk about Microsoft Dynamics. I think everybody knows who Microsoft is, but not everybody knows that Microsoft's been in the ERP market for about 15 years. There are over 2.5 million users running Microsoft Dynamics in 80 countries around the world, and over 300,000 customers from small to medium size running Microsoft Enterprise Business Management Solutions. There are about 5,000 partners globally, much like BDO. And more importantly, that Microsoft spends about $3 billion on research and development, making sure that Microsoft Dynamics is world-class business software. So why do companies choose Microsoft Dynamics? Well, there's a number of reasons. Leading industry capabilities. The software is very robust. It's very feature-rich. It's been around for about 15 years now, and it's very stable. It's very familiar to most people that use Microsoft desktop tools, so the look and the feel and the experience of the user is very, very similar. One of the benefits of that is a very short learning curve. As far as higher rate on investment, the entry price for Microsoft Dynamics is about $5,000 to purchase user licenses, so it's very economical to get into the market. There's a couple of different ways as far as deployment of the solution. You can either put it up in the cloud or run it on-premise. As far as flexibility and ease of configuration, it's very, very simple and adapts very, very well to organizations. And as your organization grows and changes, you can change the system to grow with you. So those are some of the key reasons why companies would choose BDO, Microsoft, and Microsoft Dynamics. At this point, I'm going to turn the controls over to Neil, and he's going to take you through binary stream and the software presentation.
Okay, thank you, Derek. And on behalf of all of Binary Stream, I want to thank you for letting us partner with you today on this webinar. So just a little bit about Binary Stream. Again, my name is Neil McDonald. I'm one of the solutions consultants at Binary Stream. We're based in Canada. We are a Vancouver-based company. Been doing this for about 20 years. Now, we don't sell Dynamics GP, but we are GP experts in our own right. We're what's called an ISV, an independent software vendor. So we make applications. We have about 15 different products or applications that extend the functionality of Dynamics GP, and we're now working in the AX environment as well. Again, we are a Microsoft Gold certified partner, just as BDO is. We've been President's Club nearly every year for the past 10 or 12 years. We're the largest non-selling GP ISV in North America. We have over 1,300 customers. We deal with over 300 different partners worldwide. And basically, our job is to help our partners make your experience with Dynamics GP better. We extend the functionality of Dynamics GP. We're seeing significant growth in our business space and our applications over the last few years, and we're happy to be able to present to you one application today, which is our property site management application, and in particular, the Tower Manager module that goes with that. What are the benefits of using our application to manage your properties, to manage your towers if you're in the tower business? Obviously, the revenue recognition, the revenue sharing capabilities that are available within Dynamics GP using Property Site Manager or PSM. We have some extensive reporting capabilities. We've got some reports built in, but because our product is part and parcel of the Dynamics GP environment, all of the reporting tools that you're used to using today in Dynamics GP, Smart List Builder, the Excel Report Builder, Report Writer, SSRS, any really ODBC compliant reporting tool can access all of the lease data, the revenue data, the expense data associated with your properties and your towers, and allow you to be able to drill in and get whatever data you want out of that database. We can do co-location, so you can have multiple tenants on a single property. Of course, in the tower business, that's common. You've got a tower with multiple dishes hanging off it, maybe some advertising with different tenants, and you want to be able to report on that and be able to have some visibility to that. Executing the leases is very easy in Dynamics GP with Property Site Manager. We're going to show you some of the rent processing, how we can do that, and how also the revenue sharing works as well. So that if you're in a typical environment where you have a ground lease because you're renting the property from the landowner, you put your tower on that land, so you're a tenant there. You put your tower on it, and then you start renting space on your tower. You're now the landlord, but there's some revenue sharing between yourself and the landlord as well that you're renting that ground from. So with these ideas in mind, let's go and look at the actual product. So what we're looking at right now, assuming my screen has changed for you already, is Dynamics GP 2013. So this is the latest version. And as you will see, looking on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the various modules in Dynamics GP. And this probably looks familiar to you if you are a GP user. And you're used to the interface that Microsoft has built for all of the modules, where you can come in and if you want to change the defaults, you want to change the way this module, I'm in the sales module right now, change the way that it works with the rest of Dynamics GP, you go to the setup area. If you want to create a new master record, you head over to cards and you can create customers, national accounts, salespeople. On the purchasing side, you can create vendors and so on. If you want to get some work done, you go over to transactions and you can do things like sales entry, invoice entry. We can do cash receipts. So that look and feel is familiar to anybody that's been using Dynamics GP. If you go to Property Site Manager, which was designed and built by Binary Stream, you see we give you the same look and feel. We want our applications to be part of Dynamics GP. The advantage to you, if you decide to use Property Site Manager, is your total cost of ownership changes very little because you already have Dynamics GP. You simply have to layer another module on top of it. The return on investment, just getting it in there, knowing how to use it because it looks, acts, and feels like the rest of GP, you can get your people up to speed and using the application very, very quickly because they already know where to go to do the various functions and features. So with that said, let's look at a little bit of the setup behind Property Site Manager and how it can benefit somebody from a tower environment and how you can drill in and see more detail on your properties. I'm going to start in the setup area. Property Site Manager actually consists, and we see here in the upper right corner of this screen, of a variety of different modules, and we can turn on or off the modules as you need them. So you don't have to have functions that you don't need. You don't need to see things on your menu that you don't have. You only enable the modules that you use. So starting at the top, we're going to actually focus on really the first three modules here. So the revenue module is where you are the landlord and you're renting space to your tenants. So in the tower business, you own that tower. You might be hanging a dish off that tower, and that dish belongs to AT&T, TELUS, one of the telco companies. They're your tenant. They're renting space from you on that tower. On the expense side, this would be for the ground lease. So in that case, you would be the tenant, and you have to pay rent to the landlord. And so again, in a typical tower environment, perhaps a farmer, a landowner owns a piece of property. You negotiate a lease with them. You want to set up that lease, again, in the property management system so that you can manage your accounts payables, your expenses, to make sure that rent gets paid. Now, what the tower module does, we see that the third one down here, is it captures a variety of other information that's required when you start putting towers in, when you start putting stuff up into the air. Well, there's FAA requirements and regulations and studies and so on that have to be done. Because they're communications dishes, there's communication requirements for the FCC or the CRTC that need to be met as well. So you need a place to capture all of that information instead of having to get in Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and documents shoved in the back of a file cabinet somewhere. Let's put all of that together inside the property management system. The other thing the tower module does is it enables the link between the revenue and the expense module for revenue sharing. So in a case where you're the landlord, the person that owns that piece of property, says, you know, I'm going to give you a lower rent, but I want a percentage of the revenue that you generate off of that tower. We can enable that as well, and we can allow you to do that revenue sharing. Now, there's other modules that may come into play depending upon your business. So we have customers that are using Property Site Manager for applications other than tower management. And if there's common area maintenance, or if there's sales-based rents, if you're in a variety of different renting formats, commercial, retail, residential, we have customers in all of those spaces, and we can handle the variety of functionality that's required for those types of leases as well. But we're going to focus today just on those first three. So there's some setup, obviously, that needs to be done, especially when it comes to the revenue sharing. So I want to touch very quickly on how I set up the revenue sharing, and then I'm going to actually drill into a lease and show you how this works. So the revenue sharing is quite simple. I'm simply going to create a revenue sharing template, and I've got one created here, where every time I use this template, and I can create as many of these as I want, because I may have different negotiated levels of revenue sharing with my different landlords. So in this case, every time I use this particular revenue sharing ID and attach it to a rent charge, and I'll show you that, this landlord, American 0001, is going to receive 12.5% of my revenue based on these dates. So if my lease goes beyond these dates and the revenue sharing does not, no problem. It just says, you know, after April 30th of 2026, I'm not going to do revenue sharing anymore. So you can filter this by dates. In behind here, I can expand this out, and I can even create some limits and varieties of different revenue sharing. For example, I can do a flat amount revenue sharing. I can simply say, you know, by amount. I can do percentage, so I can do a fixed percentage revenue sharing. But then I can go one step further. I can do fixed percentages with watermarks, so I can have start dates, end dates. I can have number of tenants, so I can limit it to maybe there's no revenue sharing for one tenant, but once I get 4 tenants or more, revenue sharing kicks in. So I can do it based on that. I can also have minimum or maximum revenue or invoice amounts. So we've got flat amount revenue sharing, fixed percentage revenue sharing, fixed percentages with watermarks, or fixed percentages with a cap as well. So I'm going to set up my different templates, and again, I can create as many of these as I want as I negotiate different types of leases and revenue sharing. And I'm simply going to save that. It's just a master record. It's a card. Now when I go to create my lease and my charges, I'm going to attach that in behind the charge or in behind the lease. So for example, I'm going to open up let's start with the ground lease. We'll just kind of walk through the scenario. You negotiate a lease with a landlord. So we're going to go to the expense card side, and we're going to open up a ground lease. So I have a typical ground lease in here where I can come in and say, based on a particular piece of property. In this case, I'm using actually an entire portfolio. So maybe I've got an entire portfolio by state or by province or by region, however I want to do my set up either my buildings, my portfolios, or my towers. So I've got an entire portfolio here for New York State, and I've got multiple towers within there. In this case, I'm working with Tower 1. So for this particular piece of property, in this particular lease, I have a landlord, American 0001, and these are just Dynamics GP master records. So in this case, my landlord is just a vendor, and I can drill into the vendor record, and I can see all the details I need about this vendor, his ID, his name, his address, phone numbers, and so on. I can set up various details about my piece of property as well. Now, one of the pieces that comes into play here is really important when it comes to your reporting. One of the things that we want you to be able to do is drill in and pull out a P&L, a profit and loss statement, based on this particular piece of property. So in my particular case, I have a segment in my chart of accounts that I'm dedicating to my building or my portfolio. In this case, it happens to be my third segment, and I've called it building/portfolio. Now, I'm telling the system that this portfolio, New York State, represents 03 in that segment. Now, if I do the same thing with this building, and I use this building on both the revenue and the expense side, as the rent gets collected on the revenue side, and as my rent gets paid and other charges get paid as well against that piece of property on the expense side, I can then go over to Management Reporter and say, I want to run a P&L where the building or portfolio segment equals 03. And I will get an entire P&L out of Management Reporter, which is the reporting tool that we use in the Dynamics GP for reporting. If you're in an older version, maybe you're using FRX. Exactly the same thing. You build an organization tree, and you tell the system that that segment, in this case my third segment called Building Portfolio, equals 03. I can run a P&L on an individual building. I could do the same thing if I wanted to at the individual unit or tower level. And you'll see that when we get to the unit side. There's a lot of other information I can capture here about this piece of property as well. So if I want to capture inside here, maybe I've got some equipment that's hanging off this particular building. I can create an equipment record. I can attach a fixed asset, a field service record to this as well. I can track things like insurance, property taxes. I've even got a set of user-defined fields. If there's more information you need to capture than what's available here, I can create a set of user-defined fields. And I'm sorry, I don't have this one set up. I've got 40 user-defined fields where you can put in whatever information you want. Okay, so that's at the building level. At the unit level, we go one step further, and we say, this unit, or in this case my tower, is inside of this portfolio. Again, there's a lot of information I can capture here about this particular piece of property. So I've got some additional information here. For example, my capacity, the as-built or the used capacity, what's left over, what's the ground space, what's the shelter size on this piece of property, what's the space that I've used, when did I last visit the site, when did I last do my my structural inspection, do I need to track who the manufacturer is, was there a previous owner, what's my major trading area or my BTA, so I can track that information here as well. Again, from an FAA or an FCC side, maybe I need to track various studies that have been done on this particular piece of property or this particular region, different circulars, dates, and so on, so I can track all of my heights, my elevations, and so on. On the FCC, I get the same information as well. So depending upon the regulations and the regulatory areas that you need to look after, there's information that we can capture here. Of course, there's other property information for this particular piece of property as well, latitude and longitude. That comes into play, especially if you're using a mapping program and you want to be able to map your properties. Regulatory information, again, various pieces of information that you need to track if you're going to start putting stuff up into the air from an airspace, from a study perspective. All the information you need to track to manage your towers is captured here inside the property management system. It's not shoved in drawers, in spreadsheets, Word documents, PDFs, somewhere else. And of course, all throughout the application, we provide the same thing that Microsoft has throughout Dynamics GP, these OLE containers where I can type in notes, I can put attachments in here. So if there's documents that you need to attach to this, you can scan them, put them on the server, and have them as part of this application right there at your fingertips inside the property management system. Okay, so as I set up my lease, of course I want to add some charges in here. So I'm going to pay rent, in this case $2,500. I can take this one step further and build an escalation. Most rents, especially when you get into the commercial and the tower type of business, they're not flat rents. They escalate over time. This guy wants more money over time. So I can build an escalation here. I've got a 10-year term, and I can tell him in the term I can escalate it based on various different time frames. In this case, I've got an annual escalation, and I've told the system that over the course of this lease, I want to do a comparison and escalate based on the greater of, and of course I can do a greater of or lesser of, or just no comparison at all. This one is a greater of $350 or 5% annually. We build out the entire escalation, so I can see here my rent is $2,500, goes to $2,850, $3,200, and so on. It continues to escalate all the way through, all the way out for the entire, in this case, 120 months or 10 years. This gives you the basis of a forecasting tool. So if you're looking after the properties and the CFO comes along and says, you know, what are we going to collect for rent? Or what are we going to pay for rent? I'm looking at a ground lease right now. What are we going to pay for rent on that particular piece of property next year, the next 3 years, the next 5 years, the next 10 years? Well, we've got the table built. So again, any of the standard reporting tools that work in Dynamics GP can go in and pull this data out. So you could build, for example, using the Excel report builder, a report where he could see this information anytime he wants. He just simply clicks on the button. It pulls out the Excel spreadsheet, the latest data, and your CFO now has that forecast sitting right in front of him. So I can do this for as many charges as I want. As I pay my rent, we capture the invoice number here as well, and that gives us the ability to drill back in and we can see exactly what that invoice looked like, and I can see where that happened. In this case, I paid 2 months' rent on the same invoice, so it's $2,500 a month. My invoice turns out to be $5,000. Now, what about on the tenant lease side? Now, this is the ground lease, okay? So we're looking after our landlord. Now you're going to go build your tower and you're going to rent space to somebody else. Well, let's go and look at the revenue lease. And a couple things to point out here. I can have multiple leases on the same piece of property. For example, my lease number 3 and lease number 4 are both the same portfolio and the same tower. So I can have, perhaps I've got a dish that American Electric Contractors is hanging off my tower, and maybe I've got this fourth coffee company. They're doing some advertising, so I'm renting them some advertising space. So I can have multiple tenants on the same tower, on the same piece of property. But they're on separate leases, which of course they should be because I want to invoice different people. So I have the ability to share that. When I run my reports, I can look at all of my leases for a particular piece of property or a particular tower and see everything just at a glance. I know exactly what's there, and I'll show you that when we get to the reporting side. So let's pull up one of these leases. And another way I can also have multiple tenants on the lease, maybe I have multiple tenants on a single lease as opposed to separate leases. In behind the tenant information, and again, this tenant is just simply a Dynamics GP customer, because a tenant is just a customer. Instead of selling this customer a loaf of bread or a new car, you're renting him space on your property. Again, he's just a customer. But in behind here, I can put multiple customers on the same piece of property, and I can even split by a percentage or an amount the charges for these. And I have an option here to invoice alternate tenants, and that will allow me to create an invoice for each of those individual people, even though it's under a single lease. You can do it either way. One lease, multiple tenants, or multiple leases on the same piece of property. Again, I'm going to drill into my unit, and I can even have multiple units here. So I might have this particular tenant might be leasing a space on maybe multiple towers of mine. Maybe I've got 50 towers across the country, and one company is hanging a dish off each of them on the same lease. I can layer on here multiple sites, and each one in behind has its own unique set of charges. In this case, I've got my rent. Now, when I put this charge on, I'm going to say, you know, the rent is billed monthly, in this case $3,800, and if I expand this out, in behind here, I'm going to attach that revenue sharing ID that we created earlier. Remember, we were looking at this, and if I drill and we can see that there's the one where American 0001, who is my landlord on this ground lease, is entitled to 12.5% of my revenues. So by attaching this here, the system knows that every time I create an invoice, it also wants to create a record to share the revenue, create a payable, basically, back to that landlord. Again, in behind here, I'm going to create my escalation. And this is the escalation that's based on how I'm paying or collecting my rent as opposed to paying it. As I create my accounts receivable, again, we track the invoice, and it simply creates an SOP, or a sales order processing document. We've actually just added a feature to go directly to the AR document if you prefer not to use SOP. For a single charge, you may not care. If you've got multiple charges on your rent, you may want to see the detail. If you don't want to, you can have it on the standard AR document as well. So we've got to go through the process to build all of this up. And to make things even easier to get everything set up, we have already created an import utility as well. So if we go under our utilities, under the system utilities here, we have an import utility where we can import a lot of that property data for both the tenant lease and the ground lease. We can bring in the charges. We can escalate there. We can import, the buildings and the units and the tenants and the landlords and so on. We can bring all of that information in. So if you're already in business and you're tracking this information in Excel or some other system, using the import utility, it's very easy to load that data into Dynamics GP, into PSM, and manage it. Okay, so let's go now and look at what do we have to do to create the invoices. I've got my ground lease set up with my landlord. I've got my tenant leases set up so I can lease that piece of property. If we go into the transactions, I have an area here where my accounts payable folks can go in to create my ground lease invoices. So for example, if I wanted to create my invoices for the month of July of 2017, I simply come in here and tell the system I want to pick up all my charges as of that date, July 31st, 2017. Now, I don't need to filter this. I'm going to, just to make things a little bit faster here, I'm going to filter it just to that particular portfolio of properties that we were working on. When I hit redisplay, it comes up and says, here's the charge. And I can go across and I can see all the details. And this is the rent that I owe for the month of July. I can see the cost and so on. And it's just simply a matter of marking it, which puts a check mark in here. It doesn't matter if there's one line, 100 lines, or 1,000 lines. The process is exactly the same. I've already got my batch created. I simply click the process button, and it says, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to create an invoice. And now it's now created a payables transaction. If we go back to that lease, we would see that that invoice number has now been attached there. And it comes back and says, here's what I've done. I've created a brand new invoice, number 462, and it's ready to be paid to this particular landlord. So now, because this is a Dynamics GP invoice, I can manage it through my accounts payable module. So at the end of the month, when I pay all the rest of my bills, my power bill, my water bill, my phone bill, I'm simply going to say to the system, pay all the bills for the end of July. It'll pick that one up and cut a check to that landlord as well. So it's part and parcel of the accounting system that I'm using today to manage all of my other expenses. Now, what about the revenue side? I want to collect my rent as well. So I'm going to come into the tenant lease module, and I'm going to say, the same thing. I'm going to create receivables documents here. So if I invoice for July 31st, 2017, we'll put this in a batch as well. And again, I don't have to filter it. If I simply click redisplay, it will bring up everything in my system that needs to be paid as of July 31st, 2017. I am going to filter it, however, just to keep it quicker, to New York State. When I hit redisplay, it says I've got two different tenants. I've got two different leases. There's my one for lease number 3. There's my one for lease number 4. And again, if I scroll across, I can see all the details. I can see the billing dates, and I can see the amounts that I'm going to bill these that happen to both be paying the same amount of rent on this particular piece of property. Again, I'm simply going to mark them, process it, and it's going to go through and say, great, I've created a couple invoices for you here. It brings up a report, says here's what I've done. I've now created two separate invoices. I've got invoice number, the one for lease number 3 and the one for lease number 4 with the dates behind them. So you can use custom numbering here as well. You can use the standard out-of-the-box GP numbering, where it just simply numbers them one by one. In this case, I've chosen to have my leases, my documents numbered by the lease number followed by the date that I'm invoicing. So it's the year, the month, and the year, month, day. So again, very customizable, flexible in the way that the application works. So I've now created invoices to collect my rent. Those become standard SOP or sales order processing documents. I can now go over to the collections module of Dynamics GP or the sales module, As those payments come in, I simply apply the payments to those invoices. They're standard, out-of-the-box Dynamics GP invoices. Now, my revenue sharing, I need to also create my invoices to manage my the revenue share portion of this. So again, if I put in July 31st, 2017, I'll put these in a batch. And again, I can filter it to that particular building if I want. I'm going to hit redisplay, and it's going to run through. And you know what? I forgot to post those invoices. We only pay, we're building the revenue share off of the Dynamics GP commissions structure. Therefore, I have to post the invoices in order for it to calculate the commissions. So let's make sure I've got the right batch here. There's those invoices that we were working with. So that's the right batch. So the batch is test. Let's post that batch. And we don't care about the reports at this point. We simply want that batch to be posted. And the reason we do the commission structure after is what if something changes? This invoice might change. There may be a dispute. Maybe for some reason the invoice is rejected. The customer decides not to pay it. Well, you don't want to do revenue sharing based on a number that may change. So we wait until the invoice is posted. We're basing it off the GP's commission structure, which works on paid invoices or posted invoices. So once those invoices are posted, now I can go back to my revenue sharing. And that window doesn't want to come up for some reason. Oh, still working in the background, that's why. So here's my same window. I'm going to hit redisplay. It's going to come up and it's going to pull up the three that I need to pay. So I've got one for this lease. This one apparently I didn't pay their commission, the revenue sharing last month, so it's going to pick it up now. All right, so there's my one for July for this lease. I get June and July for this other lease because I forgot to pay them last month. And again, same process. I simply mark them, click the process button, and it will automatically go out and it will create those accounts payable transactions. Now, if I want some visibility back into what's going on here, we have some reports built, typically in PSM. We don't do a lot in the reports. We're in the process of building and adding some SSRS reports, which we can show you at a later date if you wanted to see those. But most of our reports come under the inquiry side. So I can come into the inquiry and I can run inquiries based on various pieces of my property. For example, I might want to look at all of my sites. So I can look at my sites based on the site status. All of my sites, I can look at my customer type. I want to look at what's occupied, what's vacant, and so on. So I'm going to hit redisplay here, and it's going to show me the details of my sites. So I can drill in and I can see what's occupied, what's vacant, and so on, all the way across. I can see which ones are attached to leases. And I can print that or I can drop it to Excel. I can look at the various site attributes. If I have equipment attached to a piece of property, I can drill in and see that as well. On the revenue inquiry, if I want to look at my various lease information, if I come into my lease report, it'll show me all my leases. And I can separate this by either tenant leases or ground leases or both. So in this case, if I go to that particular piece of property, that portfolio, and I've got it marked as both, and I hit redisplay, it's going to show me I have 3 leases for that particular piece of property. And I can see by the lease numbers, I have 2 revenue leases and 1 ground lease on that particular piece of property. So I can scroll across, I can see the relevant details off of the front page of that lease document. Again, I can drop this out to Excel, simple click of a button, or there's some reports I can run here. For example, a lease list just simply shows me the information on this screen instead of in an Excel type format. It puts it into a report. I can look at a delinquency report. That will show me, as of today, any invoices that are outstanding that I've created but have not yet been paid. The lease validation list, I'm going to do these separately, so I've got my tenant lease validation list. Gives me the visibility to look into this lease, and I can see the charges, the IDs. If there's multiple charges here, they would all be listed. I can see each one. I can see the relevant dates. I can see the amounts. If there's deposits on file, I can see that, and so on. I can do the same thing if I wanted to look at the ground leases. So there's some reporting capability that's already built in. And as you can see, I can filter this based on the particular building, based on the site. So I may want to do a status saying, based on this portfolio, I might want to say, show me the leases I have for a particular site. In this case, it would be the site would be Tower 1. I could come in and I could look at based on dates, based on my landlord. So how many leases do I have outstanding for a certain landlord? Maybe I want to look at only those leases, so I could filter it by a particular landlord, by a particular tenant. How many leases do I have out there for AT&T, for example? I could simply come in here in the tenant, filter this to AT&T, and it will show me only the leases that belong to that particular tenant. So a lot of ability to drill in and see what's going on with your data behind here. From a rent roll standpoint, I can also see my rent rolls. I can do this on both a tenant lease and the ground lease. So for example, I might want to look at my rent roll from July 31st of 2017 to July 31st of 2018 and see what's going on here. And I'm going to hit redisplay. It's going to pull up all my leases. I've got a bunch of them here. Again, I could filter this if I want to. So I could say, let's just filter this to my New York State. So instead of showing all my leases, it's going to filter it only to the 2 that belong to New York State. And again, I can come in, I can run my rent roll in detail or summary, and it will show me, for example, exactly what's going on. So I can see my leases, I can see the towers, I can see the portfolio they belong to, who my tenants are, I can see the rent roll, how the rent's going to change. This one obviously has an escalation, this one doesn't, so I can see the change that's happening there. Again, if there's deposits on file, I can see that information as well. Everything is in one place. The new SSRS report that we are building actually takes this one step further. This one is showing me my first date and my end date, so that's what's showing here in these 2 amounts. The new SSRS report has the capability, had I chosen the same set of dates, it would show me not just July of 2017 and July of 2018, but it would show me every month in between. So I can follow it down and see exactly when that escalation is going to happen. So it's just a little more detail that's coming out in that SSRS report, which should be released, I believe, next week. So again, a lot of ability to drill back in and see what's going on with your leases. This is the tenant lease rent roll. I've got the exact same functionality. If I go into my expense side, I can come in and I can look at a rent roll, for example, on the ground lease. And it's the same information. The difference is I'm filtering this one based on the landlord or that property versus the tenant in that property. Okay, so there's a lot of functionality that's built into this. As you can see, I can set up my properties, I can set up my tenants, I can set up my landlords. They're just standard Dynamics GP master records. When I set my leases up, we're going to create standard Dynamics GP invoices, whether it's payables invoices for the ground lease or for the revenue sharing, or it's going to be SOP or AR transactions from a rent collection standpoint. At that point, I simply go over to the proper module in GP, either the sales module or the purchasing module, and I manage my payables or my receivables accordingly. Those invoices will show up in your age trial balances. If you're looking at your aging for your receivables or your payables, they'll show up there. So all of it is fully integrated with Dynamics GP. All of the data that we're creating is simply sitting in parallel tables inside the Dynamics GP database. So as I mentioned earlier, if you're using Smart List Builder, the Excel Report Builder, SSRS, to build custom reports, you can build those reports and you can drill in any of the data that's in the database. Those tools have the capability of getting it back out. So as you can see, there's a lot of rich functionality. You can manage your ground leases, your tenant leases inside of Dynamics GP in a dedicated property site management module. We're focusing today really on the ground lease side, but as I mentioned, Property Site Manager, if your business extends beyond just towers, we have customers that are using the application for retail, for commercial, for residential, and pretty much anything in between. So that wraps up our presentation today. I would like to mention, though, if you have any specific questions, put them into the chat box on the GoToMeeting. Be more than happy to get those answered for you. Anything that we can't get answered today, either because I don't have the answer at my fingertips or I have to do some research, we will absolutely get back to you with the answers on that. If you want to arrange a product-specific demo, I'm going to flip back over to the PowerPoint here very quickly and give you Derek's information from BDO. Derek is available to answer any questions as well. Anything that's specific to Property Site Manager, I'll work with Derek on. But at this point, Jake, I'm going to turn it back over to you to see if there's any questions.
All right, thanks a lot for that, Neil. It doesn't look like we have any questions coming in today. So I'd like to thank everybody who attended today's webinar. And I would also like to thank Derek Zedich, whose contact details are currently on the screen. And if you would like any further information on PSM for tower management, please get in touch with Derek directly. Thank you.